Good morning, I'm Rowena Crosby.
And I'm Deborah Renner, and we're your co-hosts for this show. Thank you for joining us for your Invisible Toolbox. The show that is sponsored by Tero International focuses on the book Row and I co-authored, and each week we look at a tool for working more effectively with others.
Think about the last time you were a customer and you were dissatisfied with your experience. Did the company make it right for you?
It's often said that customers will measure a company not by how they're treated when things are going smoothly, but how they're treated when things go wrong. So it's so important for us to be able to communicate well with our customers and fix things so that they're not unhappy.
Exactly. And the experts at Forbes say there's really three things that companies need to do to make it right with customers. The first is to allow the customer to clearly outline what their complaints and concerns are. The second is to identify a mutually acceptable course of action, and the third is to keep the customer updated throughout the process.
Well, and that's why when things have gone wrong or a mistake has been made, you see restaurants giving out free meals, airlines giving out vouchers, and retail stores giving out gift coupons.
So think a little bit about the companies you think of when you think of exemplary customer service. Do you think of Zappos, perhaps? They're famous for their 24-hour customer service, like real person on the line. And they engage every single caller, regardless of call time, in a friendly conversation.
They do. They even let you discuss your shoes.
Exactly.
And maybe you think of Costco, where you can bring something back no matter when you purchased it. They are going to take your return, or the Dollar Shave Club. And that one, the customer service model is we don't respond to situations, we respond to people.
It's such a great motto, isn't it? We've also seen Facebook recently in the last couple of months try to smooth things over with their users after a couple of missteps. In March 2018, it was revealed that Cambridge Analytica, that's a political data firm, gained access to private information of 87 million Facebook users.
And since then, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has created messages for TV and ads in print to apologize for what happened. In a full-page newspaper ad, he wrote, "This was a breach of trust, and I'm sorry we didn't do more at the time. We're now taking steps to make sure this doesn't happen again."
And he also said that Facebook would investigate every app that had access to large amounts of data, and he added that his company had a responsibility to protect the user's information.
Yeah, so has Facebook responded effectively to the user's concerns? We'll discuss that when we talk about the invisible tool of the week, which is to be compassionate and use discretion when communicating with your customers.
That's going to be a great conversation. And in our development challenge portion of the program, we're going to talk about how you can manage conflict with unhappy customers using a technique that's popular among conflict specialists.
Yes, and you're going to learn a lot about customer service communications from our two social media posts. The first is a LinkedIn article that highlights mistakes that you might be making when we communicate with customers. The second is an audio interview that it's with a marketing professor, and he details how we need to go beyond simply apologizing to our customers.
And we're excited about the interview segment today. So Eileen Wickstead, who's a principal of Wickstead & Company, and that's a crisis communications firm here in Des Moines, Strategic Communications, is going to be our guest.
And if you're following along in your own copy of your Invisible Toolbox, we're in Chapter 3. It's titled, I Know Exactly What Happened. And if you don't have your copy, please scroll down, click the link below, and order yours today. Let's get started.
So the importance of customer service cannot be overstated. And as we've mentioned, it's particularly important when things go wrong.
Yeah, and we've heard this stat before. It's according to an article from Entrepreneur. It costs 5 times more to attract a new customer than to retain an existing customer. So clearly we don't want to risk losing customers, and we need to ensure that they're always satisfied with our company.
And good customer service has many benefits. It can improve the company's public image. It generates certainly word of mouth advertising and can create the platform for opportunities and partnerships with other businesses.
It can, and that Entrepreneur article also points out that your employees pay attention to how well your company treats customers, and they actually take a lot of pride if they feel that the company gives good customer service, and they're more likely to stay with your company.
So how can we make sure we're offering the best customer service, particularly in times of conflict, which that's often when it is? And if you've if you're reading the book, you already know that there's a bunch of tools in here for communicating effectively with customers.
There are Chapter 11, it's the art of listening, and that's important with customer service. Chapter 13 focuses on avoiding jargon and acronyms, which can be confusing to
Yes.
customers. And Chapter 15 addresses avoiding nicknames, not calling your customers hon and sweetheart and those kinds of things.
I love that chapter.
Yeah.
But today we're in Chapter 3, and we're going to take a deep dive now into our invisible tool of the week, which is to be discreet and compassionate.
So turn to page 10 of the book and let's get to it.
Now, of course, it's important that we be honest with our customers when things go awry, but we also need to do more than that. We have to practice discretion. So oversharing with customers can reveal troubling morale issues and can give our customers reasons not to trust companies.
Absolutely. So if you're serving someone at a restaurant and it's taken over an hour for them to get their food, it's not very good to share with them that 10 of the wait staff or the kitchen staff have quit in the last month. That's too much sharing.
That's a little oversharing, yes. You should also make sure that you address the issue from the viewpoint of the customer. That's the one they're going to be listening from, and express that you understand their frustration, and always outline what you're going to do to make the situation right.
Yeah, so for example, Facebook mentioned there was a breach of trust after the news about Cambridge Analytica broke. And in a TV advertisement, they mentioned spam, clickbait, fake news, and data misuse as issues they were going to work to resolve. And they promised to work to protect that communication and that data so we could go back to using Facebook with our family and our friends.
So when we examine the Facebook apology on the surface, it seems pretty good.
Yeah.
So they addressed the breach of trust with their customers. They didn't go into too much information on the Cambridge Analytica issues and what oversights that Facebook itself had had.
It did, and they expressed understanding that all of us use Facebook to connect with our loved ones, not to have our personal data mined by third parties, and they vowed to do better at protecting our privacy. So we could say Facebook used our invisible tool of both discretion and compassion when they were apologizing to users.
But, and that brings us to one of the most important aspects of customer service, and that's follow through.
Yeah.
So if you promise to take specific steps when you make a mistake, you have to keep your word on it. And if you don't, you're going to hurt your own image and the value you have for your customers.
Yeah, and Facebook has had privacy issues for many years.
Yes.
This was not the first. And each time a new concern comes to light, they do apologize, the same similar apology, and they also promise to get better in the future. Now, whether they'll resolve problems with data misuse after this latest breach of trust or lose users over privacy concerns, only time is going to tell.
Time will tell. Well, it's time to look at our development challenge of the week. And this week we're going to give you a terrific way to look at conflict by breaking it down into some smaller component pieces. And this will help you, well, in a lot of situations, but particularly today on the focus on the customer.
Yeah, many conflict specialists turn to a paradigm called the wheel of conflict. And at the center of the wheel are needs, and everyone has different needs, and our clients and customers might have needs that to be heard, to be understood, to be respected in the interactions we have with them.
Exactly. And so we've got the needs at the center, and then there's these spokes, and we experience conflict through those, and there's 5 of them we're going to outline for you.
Yeah, and the first, no surprise, is communication, and it could be either oral communication, written communication, or body language. All of that communicates to the customer. How we communicate can either start or aggravate a conflict.
Exactly, and we talk about that a lot in here. And the second spoke is emotions. Events trigger emotions in all of us, and the same event can trigger different emotions in different people.
It sure can. And the third is values. Different value systems can create conflicts, and what's appropriate to us might not be appropriate to our customers.
The fourth spoke is history. So do you have a long history with this customer? And if the answer is yes, that might make for a more complex conflict, but it might also make reconciliation a little simpler.
Yeah, definitely. And finally, the fifth one is structure. And this one's interesting. Elements like time or unequal access to resources can cause conflict. So it's important to be able to work within structural systems and to change them if we need to.
So we challenge you to consider this wheel of conflict the next time you're in a conflict with a customer. It might give you a new outlook on the situation and new ideas for reaching a resolution.
Let's take a look at our top social media posts of the week.
And those of you that follow Tero on social media already know we post useful links and content several times every day, and right now we're going to feature 2 of those.
Our first post comes from LinkedIn. It's a deep dive into 7 customer service communication mistakes to avoid. We covered a few of those on the show today, but there is more. There might be some you don't even realize that you're making. This link and this post is going to be on all Tero social media platforms on Monday.
And our second featured post is an audio interview with the Harvard Business Review. It features marketing professor Jagdeep Singh, and he explains why apologizing for mistakes isn't enough. So, of course, an apology is appropriate if we've made a mistake, but it needs to be accompanied by problem solving. You will find a link to that on all Tero social media platforms on Wednesday.
And now we're going to cut away to our Ask the Expert segment. We're so glad to have had the opportunity to interview Eileen Wickstead. She's the principal of Wickstead and Company, and that's a strategic communication company. So she will have a lot of insight to share with us. Well, we're so thrilled to be joined by Eileen Wickstead, and Eileen is the principal at Wickstead and Company, a strategic communications company. You work with crisis communications. I feel like I am asking the expert. We deal with communications, and I just admired your work, and I know Ro has as well over the years. So Eileen, before we begin, can you give our viewers just a little bit of background on your experience in helping clients communicate through times of crisis?
You bet. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much, and I'm really delighted to be here. I'm a big fan of yours as well. So when you invited me to participate, I was like, absolutely. So a little bit about myself that I'll share. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, right? So I come to the Midwest through Brooklyn and ended up working for NBC News and moved around the country with regard to NBC News, with regard to NBC affiliates, and then started this company after about 14 years working in television news. And it really began with, how do you deal with the media? Because media is viewed as high risk, low control, right?
Yes.
And people are fearful. And so it began with, how do you help tell your story when the media calls? And it really has morphed and changed over the last 2 decades to, should you even do the media interview? Or if you have an issue or a problem, how do you involve the media? And so what's interesting about our work is we really began going into the crisis field because when the media calls, it tends to be about bad news, right?
Yes.
That's when they tend to call.
It.
And that's when people tend to be really, really fearful, right? I'm going to say the wrong thing. So we started really working in crisis from the get-go after we morphed from just, media training into really sort of crisis. And so we work in really 5 different areas. So we work in hospitals, and there's a crisis all the time in a hospital. Poor patient outcomes, inappropriate professional behavior, just a variety of things. And we've had a number of our air ambulance crashes and tragedies and those kinds of things. We work in energy, specifically with regard to nuclear. And I'll tell you, thankfully, there have been no crisis with regard to that. But, we work with utilities, and there's an ice storm, right? Or one of our big utilities was hit by the hurricane, and it wasn't their crisis, but their poor response, their failure to respond became their crisis. We work in agribusiness. We also work in finance and insurance. And then we have a relatively new 3-year sports division. So there's been a lot of crisis in sports as of late. So we work with professional teams, and then we work a lot with collegiate football, specifically coaches. And so when we think about a crisis, it could be a crisis with regard to something they said or alleged treatment of players that creates a crisis for them. Or if their players don't behave in an appropriate way, it's a reflection on them. So it's exciting, it's fun, exciting. No day is ever alike. We've got 16 people on our team, and we just love what we do because I really feel that people call us at that moment in time where they're really most vulnerable. And I try to say to our team, first of all, it's a tremendous privilege to be called in at that moment. Yes. A huge responsibility.
Yes.
huge responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that background. It's just a vast array of people that you do work with in communication. In your opinion, what was the biggest mistake made when addressing customer concerns? I'm sure you've noted many over the years
Oh
of
my
things
goodness.
you've seen people do or say.
Yes. So failure to respond.
Okay.
This sort of idea where an organization is tone deaf, that they completely don't have an appreciation of why they may have been insulting.
Okay.
So I remember a number of years ago, J.C. Penney put out a new T-shirt, and it was a back to school T-shirt, and get your back to school T-shirt, and it was aimed at the tweens, right? And it was girls, so that would be like 10 to 12, and it was a T-shirt, and it was a cute graphic T-shirt, and it says, "I'm too cute, so my brother had to do my homework."
Oh my goodness.
Well, first of all,
Yes.
I don't know who designed that. And second of
Oh, my
all, when
goodness.
people came out and said, "Are you kidding? How could you come out with that?" They didn't respond. They were taken back that people wouldn't get the joke. And so I think number one, a failure to appreciate your audience's feelings and needs.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, perception is reality. If people are offended, if you did not meet their expectations and you fail to recognize that you didn't meet their expectations,
Yeah.
then you've got a problem. That's a
Absolutely.
big issue. So for our clients, sometimes people will say, "Well, I don't understand what the big deal is." We don't get to decide whether or not it's a big deal. Our customers do, right?
Yes,
If
exactly.
customers think it's a big deal, then guess what? It's a big deal,
deal.
and you need to address it.
Yes, great example. How do you handle, or how do people handle complaints when someone's just openly hostile to them? What
Well-
do you suggest?
Well, we do a lot of training with regard to media training, and also what we call stakeholder engagement training, where we practice dealing with hostile individuals. And I think what is so difficult is that most people aren't hostile, right? We may disagree on issues, but I believe you're a good person. And so when somebody comes out with just this hostility and loud voice and accusatory language, it forces people to do one of two things. One, for some people, it forces them to sort of melt, right? Like, I can't believe that. Or it emboldens people and they really want to push back. What we tell people is to really first begin asking yourself, why is this person so hostile? Why is this person hostile? And try to seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And number one, acknowledge. So clearly, I can see that you're angry and you're upset. So validate what you're seeing. I see that you're angry and you're upset. The second thing that you can then say to them is, help me understand, right? So help me
Yes.
understand. Third, they may be angry or hostile for something that has nothing to do with you, right? So here's the example that I use. Frequently, we work with manufacturing companies and others where they're at, or even in hospitals where we're saying to people, "Hey, listen, we need you to work an extra shift. You need to work through the weekend. We've got a big outbreak of whether it's flu or whatever it may end up being." And people will become very hostile. "I can't believe you asked me to do that again. You don't care about me," right? So this whatever.
Yes.
And what you find out when you're peeling back the layers is this is the third weekend. It's the third football game they're not going to be able to watch their son play in.
Yes.
It's the third weekend they're asking their husband to take their daughter to ballet. And so it's not that you've asked them to work overtime. It's everything that they're then going to miss.
Add up to it too.
And so therefore, really try to seek to understand before being understood, and then acknowledging that they're angry. However, what I will also tell you is this, and I grew up in New York, right? So
Yes.
a lot of hostile people there. I try not to be one of them, but at a certain point, I will tell someone that clearly you are very upset, and this is not a productive discussion. I'm going to give you some time, but this is not productive because no one needs to be a punching bag,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to do that.
Oh, so there's more to the story, and then sometimes you just have to delay that conversation to a different time, or a
Right.
different place.
Absolutely.
Well, what companies have you seen that just displayed excellence in times of crisis and maybe in customer service situations?
So I think that there's a lot of really good examples of different companies, but that it's such a fluid area today. So let me give you an example of 3 different companies
Okay.
of what they did and how they did things differently. And I think the verdict is still a little bit out on whether or not the strategies worked. So in a 48-hour period. Earlier this summer, there were 3 crises that occurred. The first was the Starbucks crisis in Philadelphia, followed by a 60-minute piece that was done on Allegiant Airline with regard to their bad safety record. And then on that Monday, the Southwest airline engine failure.
Yes.
A woman was killed because she went partially out of the window. Okay, so within 48 hours, you had these 3 different type of crises, and the companies responded differently. So let's begin with Allegiant Airline first. They made a decision that they were going to what we call narrow focus, and what they decided to do was, I'm not going to deal with the media because you don't have the story right and you're using old data. We're not going to deal with regulators because we deal with regulators in our normal course of business. The only people we care about are our customers who happen to be part of our loyalty reward program and our staff members, our pilots and our employees. And so they did no media interviews. Their CEO came out in a video, spoke only to those high engaged customers and those things, and said, a lot of the information is inaccurate, it isn't fake, we're committed to safety, and all those other sorts of things. So he narrow framed it. Southwest Airlines ended up being a traditional approach, right? So they had a crash, and thankfully only one person was killed. Still a tragedy, but one person was killed. They had extraordinary talent by the pilot, landed the plane safely. And what they did was they ended up doing a news conference. Their CEO ended up using video, and they used what we call the 4-part message model for crisis leadership. Care and concern, they accepted the responsibility, they detailed their responsible actions, they demonstrated cooperative attitude, and they also demonstrated a certain level of resolve. We will get through this, we will improve, we will learn, we will understand, we will move forward. The third and final is Starbucks, right? So Starbucks is facing this backlash of that in one of their stores, their employees called the police on 2 African American men who I think were real estate agents who were waiting for a meeting. They hadn't purchased anything, and the employee called the police. The police came in, arrested them for trespassing, and really escalated it. And Starbucks could have said, well, that's an issue with the Philadelphia Police Department, not us. They did not. They decided to own the crisis. And in owning the crisis, they decided to own the solution. They closed down their stores on May 29th. They decided to do training for everyone. They decided to go into this whole, conscious inclusion, unconscious bias. And they decided to own it big because then they could own the solution. Here's the problem. The problem with that sort of responding to complaints or responding to customers who are not happy or responding in a crisis situation is that you can lay out the best strategy, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. but I think it's the intent of the company to be factual, to be truthful, and to be compassionate that really is going to really lead the day.
So important. We could just keep you here all day. I know the viewers
would be
have
fun.
to be as interested as we are in this. Thank you so much. You've
Well, my
shared a wealth
pleasure.
of information in this short amount of time, and I just think how much help your business must be to those clients that come to you, because these are very sensitive times for them and times in which they want to represent themselves in the best possible light. Wonderful, wonderful work, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Well, our pleasure. What we always tell our clients is, understand the fact pattern, be accurate, be truthful, and then you can move forward. So it's really about telling the truth early and often and well. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being
Thank you.
here.
Thanks for joining us today. If you missed any portion of the program or would like to share it with others, you'll find the entire program on Tero's YouTube channel. Join us again next Monday morning at 9:03 Central Time, where we will explore another tool in your Invisible Toolbox.
And now it's your turn. We welcome your feedback and suggestions for future shows. Email your ideas to ideas@yourinvisibletooolbox.com. Find us out there on your favorite social media platform. And we'd like to thank today Rachel Trainham, our camera person, Kyle Plummer, our director, and Eileen for that great interview and
That was
insight.
a terrific interview, wasn't it? And thanks to all of you for joining us, and that's a wrap.